I want to show a way to handle bad dates. In this case, I have two dates that are proper and will be understood by Power Query as dates. I have one where an American wrote it wrong, and then I have one that Power Query will completely fail to handle. And this way of handling it won't be like last time where I made a function that will try to fix them. Instead, it will tell the user that, hey, something is wrong and where is it wrong? So you can go in and manipulate it yourself. So my first thing I want to do is to add an index column because the user needs to know where, what row is the error in. So if I had 20,000 rows, I would I have a hard time finding where the error is. So simply index from 1, because my rows will be index 1 based when I'm in Excel. Then I want to make sure that this is specifically any, which it actually isn't. Right now it says text, which isn't a problem, but I might have a situation where if the first 1000, or I think it's the first 200, if those would be proper dates, then Power Query would think it's a date, which is why I'm going to set it here to be not type text. I want it to be type any. In other words, I'm telling Power Query to not try to manipulate the date or the type of data. And then after I do this, I want to specifically try to convert this table, this column into the date type. And it might be a bit mad if I try to change it, because I just have one step here where I change the type. So when I try to change it again, it will say if I want to replace it, which normally happens, but it didn't here. So I'll just copy paste this and then change it manually. And I wanted that to be, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. I want to add that as a new step. And here I get my errors, but I need to go back first and change this from type date to type any. And now this is fine, but then here I can say change to date types. And here I fully expect to have errors when I change them into dates, because exactly here you can see how it changes from being on the left and not cursive, but here it is on the right and cursive, which means it probably understands that these two are dates, but here I have my errors because it can't convert an American date into a proper date value. And I then want to maintain any errors because I'm actually going to make these intermediary steps where I can check if I have any errors. So first I need to say I only want to keep rows with errors. In this case I have 2, and then I can do a join, because right now I can't use this for anything when I want to print the table with my errors in Excel, in this case in Power BI. This doesn't help me that it just says error. I need to grab what is the value. And if I try to just click on it, it will give me the single row, the single record of errors, but that's not what I want. I want the original value of my errors. So I'm going to do a self join, which I'm not going to get very much help because Power Query doesn't want me to natively do what I'm trying to do, which is to do a join on an earlier step. So I'll make this temporary step where I then have to go in and manipulate it on my own. So it says I'm using the kept errors table as my left table and join on the index column, and then it's joining on the kept error step. But actually that should be before I change the type to date, because this is when my error happens, and here I don't have my error. So I can copy the change type name and say this is the step I want to do a join on. And it's still based on the index column because I know those are the same. And then I can expand, and I don't need the index, but I do need the date. So this now means I actually have this table, but I've removed the proper dates, which is exactly what I want. And then I can remove this column because it's not useful. So now I have a situation where I know that if I have any errors in my dates, so if I have a date that can't be converted into a proper date, then I know it's happening in row 3 and in row 4, and I should probably change the name of that so it's even more apparent what you're supposed to do. And I can also say that these are wrong dates, and I need to do a check right after this to say, hey, if I can find any errors, then I need to do something, which is to print this table. But if there are no errors, then I want to do whatever it is I want to do, which in this case is not very much but I just need to count the rows, which is a transformation. So now I have 2 rows where my my dates aren't actual proper dates, or at least it can be interpreted as a date, which means I can now do a check right in a moment, as I said. But before I do that, I just want to call my change type step. Yeah, I just want to call my change type step just to make it a bit easier to see what's going on. So now I'm back here again, but this is where I have all my rows. So this is what will happen if I don't have any errors. And then of course I'm actually supposed to do something, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to do, because this is just an example, but you would want to actually do whatever transformations you have to do. Maybe you want to add 7 days to the date. Actually, I can do that instead. And again, these 2 being errors is actually expected because I do have errors. So once this whole thing works, I'll show how it should work normally when I don't have any errors. But now I have my function, so I'm actually doing something if everything is fine. And the last thing I have to do is just to say that if I have any rows with errors, which is this step, then I need to call that one, renamed columns, so I can make that a bit easier to see. And I can say this should be call if there are no errors, which means all I need to do is to say that if rows, counted rows step is greater than 0, so there are errors, then I want to call if there are errors, else I want to call if there are no errors. And I do have errors, which means I call this one where I show the row where I have my error, and it doesn't tell you what you have to do. You have to kind of figure that out yourself. And if there are no errors, then you will call this if there are no errors. So I just want to show how Power BI isn't super useful for this, because in Excel it would just print the table and then it would change the column headers. But I am in Power BI, so I can have intelligence. I can just make that a table. So this would tell me row 3 and row 4, which isn't supposed to be a sum, but that's fine because these should be unique. So this is fine. This is if I have any wrong dates. And again, it would make more sense to print this to Excel, but I don't want to pay a subscription fee for Excel. So I'm using Power BI. So if I go back to the source and then remove my 2 wrong rows, so I can just add another value. If I could add another value. So now I don't have any wrong, I don't have any errors. I do have errors because I am American apparently. So I don't want that. So that is why you always want to do data validation when you input dates, because it's super easy to make a mistake. But now I have 0 errors, because also my table with only the errors is empty, which is exactly what I expect. And that is actually a pointless step. And then again call if there are no errors. But then what will happen here with Power BI, and this is why it's bad to do this kind of thing in Power BI, because these 2 columns won't be found anymore. So this table here will update and it will get mad at me. Yeah, something is wrong with one of the fields because wrong dates doesn't exist anymore. So you would probably want to make a measure that does something, or you'd want to change the names so that it makes sense with the columns, but that's not really the point here. The point is that when everything works, it will print a normal table, and when it doesn't work, it will print then, hey, you have this index, this row position, and this is the value, so you can see what's going on and find it. So that is everything I had. Yep,